pretty sure we're on. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Audit Committee. Roll call, please.
Good morning. Today is July 23rd, 2018. Richard Correll, absent. Audit Member Ed Khachadurian.
Here.
Tom O'Shaughnessy.
Present.
Alex Parajon.
Present.
And Chair Zare Amirian.
I am here. Next item, please.
It's the business agenda. The agenda for today, July 23rd, 2018, Audit Committee meeting was posted on Thursday, July 19, 2018, on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Next item is oral communications. I have no cards in front of me. Before we move on to the approval of the minutes, I just wanted to introduce our city manager, Ms. Yasmin Beers. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Good morning, members of the committee. I wanted to come before you this morning to introduce to you our new Assistant City Manager, Rubik Golanian, who is here this morning and will be assigned to the Audit Committee moving forward from today. As you all know, I served in that capacity for, a long time, 10-plus years, but 18 years on and off. It's been a pleasure to work with each of you through the years, especially with the chair. We've gone through a lot of changes in the Audit Committee and your leadership. We appreciate quite a bit, Chair Amirian. So Rubik Golanian has been with the City of Glendale for the last 18 years. As you all know, he was the Public Works Director. He does hold that title still until we fill that position. And so 18-year career in the public sector. Prior to that, he was in the private sector. Extensive background, is a city engineer, and brings to my team, I think, a piece that I needed in terms of balancing me out. I'm the person who has the big ideas and says, that's the vision and let's go do it. I need someone who is on the team who will be able to say, sure, we can do it. However, don't forget, we have to do a lot of things in between before we get to kind of the goal that you're setting out there. And so the capital improvement project piece, project management piece, in terms of his background and experience, of course, being an engineer, I think brings a lot of balance to the city manager's office as well. So with all of that, I think it's a great team moving forward. And again, he will be assigned to the Audit Committee, and I'm sure we'll be working with each of you moving forward. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak before you get into the business agenda today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and welcome. Okay. Let's move on to item number 4.
Number 4 is approval of minutes. Minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on April 23rd, 2018.
Do I have any motions?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Richard Correll,
Aye.
Ed Khachadurian,
Aye.
Tom O'Shaughnessy,
Aye.
Alex Parajon,
Aye.
and Chair Zare Amirian.
Aye. Let's move on to our action items today.
Number 5 is action items. A, election of Audit Committee Chair.
Okay. Do we have any nominations?
I move to nominate Mr. Zara Amirian.
Any seconds?
Second.
Any other nominations? I'll give you guys a few minutes to think about this. Okay. Do we need a motion to close the nominations? Okay. Just give it a few more seconds here. Okay. We'll close the nominations for chair. And roll call, please.
Richard Correll. Ed Khachadurian.
Aye.
Tom O'Shaughnessy.
Aye.
Alex Parajon. And Chair Zaria Mirian.
Aye. Thank you all for your continued confidence in my leadership, and I appreciate having the opportunity to serve in this capacity. I believe now this will be the third or fourth year, so lucky me. Thank you. Let's move on to action item 5B, please.
5B, election of Audit Committee Secretary.
I have a quick question. Is there any limits on the terms of any of these positions?
There is not.
I have to be forcefully deposed, it sounds like. I'm kidding. That's magic. Election of Audit Committee Secretary. Any nominations? I have one in mind. Anybody? Okay. Do I have to set aside the gavel in order to make this nomination? You don't. Yeah. So I'd like to nominate Miss Mary Chahaspayan if she would be willing.
I'd love to.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Richard Correll.
Aye.
Ed Khachadurian.
Aye.
Tom O'Shaughnessy.
Aye.
Alex Parajon.
Aye.
And Chair Zaria Mirian.
Aye. Congratulations. Action item 5C.
5C is the annual report to City Council.
Okay. You all should have our annual report to the City Council in front of you. Do I have any motions on this item?
Can we take a minute to take a look at it?
Absolutely.
I'm trying to find this on this toy. Oh, it's.
You know what? Maybe I will take this opportunity to go ahead and read this into the record. We are responsible for an annual report to the City Council, and the one that we have here reads, Dear Mayor Sinanian and City Council members, each year, the Audit Committee must report our actions and activities to the City Council per Glendale Municipal Code Section 2.82.100. The purpose of this memo is to communicate our activities for the period of July 1, 2017 to June 30, 2018. The Audit Committee met 3 times during fiscal year 2017-18, where we were provided with financial and budgetary updates and internal audit activity reports. One of the scheduled quarterly meetings was canceled because no report was issued during the quarter ending September 30, 2017, and there was no other pertinent information to be presented. For these reasons, and in my capacity as chair of the Audit Committee, I opted to cancel the October 24th meeting to save valuable city resources. I am also happy to report that the Audit Committee held our first meeting utilizing electronic tablets on April 23rd, 2018, towards our goals of paperless meetings in order to further save city resources. The Audit Committee has assisted the City Council by reviewing financial information and management reports, and by providing independent recommendations regarding the scope, priority, and methods of audit-related activities within the city. The financial activities completed by the Audit Committee include number 1, received audit communications from Vavernick Trine Day and Company LLP on their responsibility, scope, and activities for the annual audit of the city for the period ending June 30, 2017. Number 2, received and reviewed the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, CAFR, for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2017. Number 3, affirmed the continued use of the independent auditors Vavernick Trine Day and Company LLP covering the fiscal year ending June 30, 2018. 4, received financial and budgetary reports from the Finance Department and City Management. The internal audit activities completed by the Audit Committee include: 1, received and reviewed the fiscal year 2017-2018 internal audit annual work plan and monitored progress in addressing the risk priorities for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. Number 2, reviewed internal audit reports as they were issued, were briefed on all completed audit assignments by internal audit staff and department representatives, reviewed the progress of quarterly follow-up activities, and discussed the action plan related to outstanding audit issues reaching specified criteria. And number 3, monitored the types of projects performed by internal audit staff to ensure ongoing independence in the internal audit function. The Audit Committee members wish to express our appreciation to city staff that support our efforts and keep us informed of events and issues in the city. We look forward to continuing to serve the interests of the city of Glendale in the coming year. Respectfully submitted, Zaria Mirian, Audit Committee Chair. Any motions?
We need a motion to send this to the city council?
To approve it, or?
Yeah, to approve it as read.
So moved.
I second.
Roll call, please.
Richard Correll,
Aye.
Ed Khachaturian,
Aye.
Tom O'Shaughnessy,
Aye.
Alex Parajon,
Aye.
and Chair Zaria Mirian.
Aye. Okay, let's move on to reports, please.
Number 6A, Internal Audit Activity Report as of 6/30/2018, Jesse Zhang, Internal Audit Manager.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Audit Committee members. My name is Jessie Zhang, Internal Audit Manager. This morning, I would like to provide you a report of internal audit activities for the quarter ended June 30th, 2018. So you may find the activity report within your iBook on the iPad. So you may noted that we modified the report a little bit. So we added reference numbers to each of the 7 sections for easier following. And also we added a continuous auditing item in this report that I will talk about later. During this past quarter, we issued 2 audit reports. The third project listed here in the completed audit projects is a joint project with City of Anaheim on Magnolia Power Project. So the report was actually released by the City of Anaheim to the SCIPA on June 29th, 2018, but was retracted per City of Burbank's request. So we prepared a short memo, basically summarize what we've done. But once we receive the final report, we'll we'll forward that report to you along with the short memo.
Why was it retracted?
The reasons, what I heard, is basically Burbank had a chance to review the report, but the final report added executive summary and there's a couple other minor changes. So then they said they didn't get a chance to review the final version of the report. So that's why they wanted to have time to review the final version before agree to the release of the report.
Okay.
So this morning, we prepared 2 PowerPoint presentation of the completed audit project. The first one is the homeless program operation audit. Before I invite Natalie come up to present the audit results to you, I would like to remind everyone the objective of this audit is focusing on efficiency. It's by no means, to solve the homeless program problem for the city, which is such a hot button topic nowadays. So the focus for this is to identify the areas that efficiency can be gained, so that we can do more with limited resources. So with that, I would like to invite Natalie up to give her presentation.
Good morning, Chair Marion and fellow Audit Committee members. My name is Natalie Manami Valdivia, Senior Internal Auditor for the City of Glendale. I'm here to share with you the completed Community Services and Parks Department's Homeless Programs Operations Audit. And this morning I will walk you through the background, objectives and scope, methodology, summary of results, summary of recommendations, and then conclude with an opportunity for questions. The City of Glendale Homeless Programs Unit is under the supervision of the Director of Community Services and Parks and consists of 6 staff positions, including a Community Services Manager, a Homeless Programs Coordinator, and 3 full-time hourly workers and 1 part-time hourly HMIS Resource Specialist. Currently, of these positions, there's 1 vacancy for a position that's responsible for the Measure H and state ESG funding. The city's homeless program unit and its operations are funded by various HUD grants, local county funding, and the city's general fund. The city is responsible for the homeless programs operations funding, which includes ensuring that the funding is administered in accordance with federal, state, local, and program rules. The objective of the homeless program unit is to end and prevent homelessness in the city of Glendale. The key homeless programs that the City of Glendale administers include the Homeless Continuum of Care Program, the Emergency Solutions Grant, the State ESG and Measure H, and like I mentioned, or I guess the State ESG and the Measure H funding are new to the City of Glendale, and the General Funded Landlord Incentive Program. The Homeless Continuum of Care Program is our largest grant, and it is funded by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and is to address housing, mental health, employment, case management, and health needs of at-risk homeless and homeless families. So this includes programming for the homeless people, including street outreach, case management, access to the emergency shelters, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and homeless management information system implementation and management. The Emergency Solutions Grant is intended to engage homeless individuals and families living on the street and to improve the number and quality of the emergency shelters of the homeless individuals and families, and to help operate these shelters and provide essential services to shelter residents, rapidly rehouse homeless individuals and families, and to prevent families and individuals from becoming homeless. The State Emergency Solutions Grant, like I mentioned, is new, and the California Department of Housing and Community Development administered ESG program receives funds from HUD, and the Housing and Community Development has redesigned how it allocates and distributes its funding to align with local systems, federal ESG and HERF goals. The Measure H is the new Los Angeles County Homeless Initiative that's funded by sales tax revenue for homeless prevention services for individuals, and to partner with cities to expand rapid rehousing, county-wide outreach system, and strengthen the coordinated entry system, and enhance the emergency shelter program. The Landlord Incentive Program is, like I mentioned, a general funded program, and it helps to encourage landlord acceptance of tenants with vouchers and certificates issued by the Glendale Continuum of Care. The objectives and scope. The homeless program operations audit was conducted at the request of the Community Services and Parks Management and was included within our fiscal year 2017-18 annual audit work plan. The purpose of the audit was to assess the city's homeless program and administration and identify areas where the grants can be administered more efficiently. The scope of our audit was January 1, 2017 to December 31st, 2017. In order to gain an understanding of the process, we interviewed city staff, including homeless program unit and other city staff, to gain a full understanding of the homeless program's operations, because not only are the homeless programs unit involved, but also our finance department, our legal department, and actually our police department also participate in the homeless programs operations. The City of Pasadena homeless program staff, and we reviewed the HUD regulations, the City of Glendale policies and procedures, and Los Angeles HMIS collaborative policies and procedures. We also compiled a task and time database consisting of homeless program related tasks and estimated time required for completion. These time estimates were based upon staff's past experience and were reviewed and adjusted by the Community Services Manager. And these time estimates provided useful information to identify efficiency improvement opportunities. In addition, we conducted an analysis of the task plus time database by identifying the time-consuming tasks, grouping them into task categories, and evaluating these tasks for efficiency opportunities. We also compiled a listing of leverage services and supports that included but weren't limited, like I mentioned, to the Finance Department, the City Attorney's Office, the Housing Division, and annual homeless count volunteers. So these are positions that are not funded directly by the grant funding, but are general fund supported. Or in the case of the annual homeless count volunteers, it's voluntary. We also utilized data analytics software to perform user access control testing on the homeless program access databases. So that included ELOCs, IDIS, and ELITE users. As a result of the audit, there were 6 improvement opportunities identified, and of these 6, there were 2 ranked as priority 1, 3 ranked as priority 2, and 1 ranked as priority 3. There were also, as you can see, 2 improvement innovation opportunities identified, where our innovation staff will work with the department to create tools to improve their efficiency. So. The summary of recommendations, so we had, like I mentioned, we had 6 observations, and the first recommendation was to create an automated match requirement spreadsheet. So this will help to enforce the agency's required monthly match requirement submission and allow us to perform timely follow-up. So this will reduce the risk that the match requirement will reduce non-compliance of the match requirement and reduce the amount of time that it takes at the program year end to reconcile the match requirement. Work with IPA to improve the efficiency of the match process with an electronic tool that includes the project field and references specific dates for the services provided, including the service dates within the electronic spreadsheet. Will establish a control to prevent duplicate reporting and reduce the time required to review for duplicates, and work with the IPA to review the leverage services identified and determine those support and or services that could be cost beneficial to utilize as grant required matching funds. The second recommendation was to track and monitor systems user listings. So in our report, we had 4 observations and related to shared logon credentials, generic user IDs, and user access lists not being readily available. Those 3 recommendations have already been implemented. Then the one that is outstanding is we recommended that they establish a procedure to ensure that there is a backup administrator for all homeless programs related systems, especially for the drawdown systems, and that's anticipated to be completed by September 30th. The third one was to implement a process to regularly update policies and procedures. The fourth observation was to monitor invoice processing timeline and goals. So basically, establish a process to track and update. Basically, to monitor the invoicing processing timeline and goals. So basically, to establish those timelines and then to establish a procedure to measure how we're doing in accordance with the timelines that we've established. The fifth one is to review disbursement system changes for input accuracy. And that's going to be accomplished by reviewing a periodic sample of the changes to reduce the risk of the undetected rent calculation or recalculation errors within the ELITE disbursement system. And the last one is to evaluate and implement the 10 efficiency improvement opportunities that we identified. Those 10 efficiency opportunities were related to creating an electronic invoice tool for staff and subrecipients. So we're recommending that an electronic tool for the homeless program staff be developed that will allow them to round all calculations to a fixed decimal point and to lock those cells so that there aren't any manual adjustments. And instead of allowing the manual adjustments within the worksheet to provide a separate column to show any adjustments that were made to reconcile it to the general ledger reports. And the second item was to create training videos for routine subjects for the benefit of agencies. So because of high turnover and the number of agencies that we're dealing with, not only do we have to provide training to those staff on an annual basis, but anytime their staff turns over, our staff will go out and help to train their staff to complete all of the required tasks, for example, to complete the match requirement documentation. So we're suggesting that in the future that they consider recording those trainings and providing those to the agencies to reduce the amount of time that we spend retraining the agencies on the routine tasks. The third item is to create an electronic file for more readily accessible client information. So similar to the way internal audit has implemented OneNote, sorry, I couldn't remember the program. We recommended that they take a look at potentially implementing the same electronic work papers. And these electronic work papers would provide storage and backup of their hard copy files because currently our client files are all in hard copy format. And in the case that they need to access the information, for example, in order to assist our agencies in documenting the match requirement, there was a client release of information form that was completed and included within the file. And in order to have the match requirement agencies provide the services that were provided to our clients, we had to provide proof that we had that release of information form. So instead of having to pull those documents individually, if they were available electronically, they would be more easily obtainable. Number 4 was a quick facts sheet to summarize key agency, contract, and our client information. So basically, this would assist in summarizing information so that when it needs to be input into the ELITE system, it's readily available and reduce the time of flipping through pages to identify the key information. The fifth one is an electronic match requirement tool to auto-populate required information. So this will hopefully assist not only our staff, but also the agencies and the agencies providing the match services. So instead of having them manually complete a form, it will include columns for the applicable clients, the grant programs, and the number of hours, the allowable chargeable rate, and total the match requirement, or the value of the match requirement services provided. The sixth one was to capitalize leverage services. As I mentioned, we have other staff within the city that provide services such as the finance department and legal, and also our homeless volunteers that could be used as part of our match requirement. So we need to evaluate which of those, what departments provide services that would be cost beneficial to have them track their time in order to include it as part of our match requirement. Number 7 is the elite summary entry sheet, which is that, I guess, I apologize, the single sheet that we spoke about earlier, to summarize the information that's going to be input into the elite system. The 8th one is the automate tenant utility information update. So on an annual basis, HUD issues a memo that increases, or I shouldn't say increases, but adjusts the amount of tenant utility allowances that are provided to our participants. And we identified that there was a step missing, so that we were manually inputting those on an annual basis. So they have worked with the elite team and have automated this process. So for each tenant, this information is automatically updated based on the table at their annual recertification time. The 9th one is to utilize electronic tablets for our annual homeless count survey, similar to how our audit committee is now using the iPads for our meeting documents. Instead of staff and volunteers going out on an annual basis to do the homeless count and manually preparing the count and then having to come back to the city and input that information, we're recommending that they work with our ISD department to see if they can get electronic tablets loaned to them for the annual homeless count survey. And the 10th one is to utilize agency updated HMIS data for the sheltered count. For the annual count, there are 2 counts. There's the sheltered count and the unsheltered count. For the sheltered count, instead of having them fill out the information, we're recommending that they rely, or they ask the agencies to timely update their information and to rely on the HMIS data. So that would allow us to eliminate the step of reconciling the paper survey results to the HMIS database. Each of the observations mentioned were discussed and agreed upon by Community Services and Parks Department Management. Community Services and Parks has provided responses, action plans, and anticipated implementation dates for each of the items. An internal audit will follow up on each of the items during our quarterly follow-up process until each item is resolved. This concludes my presentation of the Homeless Programs Operations Audit. The Director of Community Services and Parks, Anna Bolanikian, and the Community Services Manager, Yvette Sanvalian, and I are here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Let's open it to questions, please.
I was still thinking about my question.
Okay, then I'll.
No, but I thank you for that. I took the time to figure it out. These are great recommendations, and I actually work with one of the clients that I work with is trying to address homelessness in the San Gabriel Valley, and so I'm familiar with the work of LASA and Measure H and the county's initiative on homelessness, the CEO's department. And so I understand that the purpose of this audit is about efficiency, so using the existing resources more efficiently, right, to
Correct.
improve outcomes, right?
Correct.
One of the things that I maybe it was in there, but maybe I didn't catch it, is taking the information around efficiency and impact and outcomes and things like that, and then using that to inform funding, using that to inform what type of funds are needed for what purposes, gaps, new needs that emerge through the work that are yet to be fully addressed. Is that somehow baked into the audit, or could information from the audit be used to better target and request needed resources to address unmet need?
I believe that, for example, I mentioned that our general fund funds a program called the Landlord Incentive Program. So they do continuously evaluate the gaps and the needs, and in this case, they were having difficulty getting Glendale, or not even necessarily Glendale, but getting landlords to accept our participants into their program. So this Landlord Incentive Program provides things such as, I believe, the first month's rent that helps encourage the landlords and to accept our participants and to get them into housing.
As a follow-up question, I noticed that you're missing a staff member to oversee the Measure H funds, as well as there was an additional fund that's...
ADSG.
Okay, so what is the status of that person being hired? Because obviously the Measure H funds are pretty significant and important, and are ongoing for ostensibly another 8 years.
I will ask Mr. Bolanikian.
Good morning, Chair, Mary, and members of the Audit Committee. Onik Bolanikian, Director of Community Services Parks. The full-time hourly employee is in backgrounds. We made an offer to an employee, and basically she did have a medical last week. That person will be solely responsible for Measure H and State ESG. We currently have a senior admin analyst in the Parks Administration Office handling Measure H and State ESG, but when that person comes on board, she'll be responsible for both those programs.
I have a quick question. I mean, since we're talking about efficiency, do we know what is the per head cost of a homeless person in city of Glendale? Have we ever done something like that, or maybe compare it to other cities? Do we know the number of homeless people? I mean, I'm sure there's a number, not that I'm asking you if you know what that is, but what is also the size of the program in terms of the grant dollars? Because, I mean, it was a great presentation, but what I didn't see was that how are we going to be able to see whether or not these recommendations actually result in actual efficiencies? So,
total HUD dollars is about 2.4 million, plus we get about 150,000 from ESG through CDBG. We have a little over 260 homeless persons as part of our PIT point-in-time count that was conducted in January of this year. Rest of the answers, I'm going to have Yvette Samuelian, our Community Service Manager, overseeing homeless programs, to answer for you.
okay.
Good morning, Chair Marion, members of the Audit Committee, city staff. My name is Yvette Samuelian. I'm in charge of the Glendale Homeless Continuum of Care. I'm going to give you one quick background in terms of the Continuum of Care program. Glendale is one of 3 cities that is its own Continuum of Care. City of Glendale, Pasadena, Long Beach, and LASA that oversees over 85 cities. Part of the LASA is its own continuum. Since 1993, and I've been in the position of various positions within 98, we've been running the homeless programs for the city. With regards to the Continuum of Care funding, the funds are all national competition, so we are not guaranteed to receive the funding. We compete for it successfully because we run successful programs for the city. With regards to the match requirements that Ms. Manami had been mentioning, for about $2.4 million, our agencies and city has to raise about $650,000 cash or in-kind match to support the homeless programs. This is not to include leveraging the homeless programs with a 3.1 ratio to be able to run the programs. Mr. Bolanikian mentioned that we have about 260 homeless persons in the city of Glendale. That's only within the one night of the count that we go out and serve. We serve within our continuum about 2,500 unduplicated homeless persons in the city and provide about $50,000 of duplicated services to the clients. For example, a cost of housing a homeless person is about $15,000, just basic leasing or rental subsidy, but that comes along with case management support, mental health support, substance abuse services, etc. So the cost to have a client in housing is a lot more efficient than having clients within any of our systems, whether it's hospital, jail, foster care systems. And that's about $500,000 of savings to the systems of care if we were to house each homeless person within any of our community. And with Measure H, and you guys asked about gap funding, part of our homeless count, we do develop recommendations on what are the gaps in the city of Glendale, what type of programs we should apply. We did receive funding through LASA, through the CEO's office with Measure H. We plan on going back to LASA and the CEO's office to request for additional funding. We're able to successfully place about 4 to 5 homeless persons in housing within each month within the team. That's coordinated between our staff, all the nonprofits, and the homeless police department team. So we do run a pretty successful programs here, funding gaps and capacities given within every community with regards to this types of services and resources available.
So I know that one of the challenges with the loss account is not so much the point in time piece, but those who are actually not on the street, those who are potentially living in hotels or also in sort of non-permitted units or even maybe overcapacity in apartments and things like that, which are also considered homeless as well. I know it's been a challenge for LASA. I'm wondering if it's also something that's challenging for Glendale and if any ideas have emerged, because obviously it impacts the audit because it's depending upon, like we were saying, the head count obviously would impact that and the efficiency of funds per person, what have you.
Chair Amiri and Committee Member Corral, the hot homeless count is governed by the U.S. Department of Housing Urban Development. So the way we count is we have to follow the methodology is that anyone who's unsheltered in the city of Glendale in an emergency shelters. So those who are doubled up in housing or at the emergency rooms or any other institution, while they may be discharged to homelessness, they are not considered homeless. However, what we do within the city of Glendale, within Catholic Charities and Salvation Army, we work with the landlords to identify folks that are doubled up, and we work through identifying them to place them with the rapid rehousing funding. Clearly, homeless prevention is now the new targeting funding, as well as most of our communities have seen an increase in first-time homeless folks in our communities due to rent burden and a few other propositions, 47, 57, and folks being discharged from the foster care systems. So we do look at other means of identifying our homeless folks, including our working with our Glendale Water Power Department to ensure that utilities are not turned off in the event, and we connect families to those resources to prevent homelessness.
Since LASHA's regions are not based on city, but their own little map of the county, do we end up getting any minimal HHH funds through the city of Los Angeles because of our proximity to LA on our boundary?
That's a great question. We are eligible for HHH funding for new construction and permanent housing, and we have been working with our Community Development and Housing Department to identify site control within our city or nearby community. If in the event we are able to identify the site, we would apply for that funding, but we do not receive direct funding for HHH, just Measure H on the supportive services aspect of it.
Thank you.
My understanding is the HHH is City of Los Angeles only.
It is. If we are able to find a site within Glendale or near the border, then we would be eligible for funding. As site control is pretty challenging for all communities, I think currently the CEO's office is looking at alternate methodologies to site any projects and coordinate all the funding support to be able to develop the project, and that would take maybe up to 3 years of completion for permanent supportive housing.
I have a question, and I have to admit I don't really know the administrative aspect of it, but is there any opportunity for any kind of back office integration with some of the nearby cities so that, you know, collectively these programs are administered at least on a specific, you know, area of focus? Because these are all types of things that could help technically, you know, make a program efficient. I mean, I know the reason I'm asking these questions is because what I was really hoping to get out of this presentation is to see what are the specific measures that we can say, like 5 years later, 2 years later, 3 years later, that we have moved from point A to point B. I mean, these are all, like, you know, wonderful representations, except that there's no metrics attached. So if there's anything we could maybe come up with, or if you could just explain to me, that would be really helpful.
Chair Khachaturian, with regards to our homeless count, since about 2007, we have reduced homelessness in the city of Glendale. Unfortunately, this was the first year around that we've had increase in the homeless population. As I said, there's 3 new reasons as to the reasons why we have new homeless folks in the city of Glendale. What we've done is every year that we utilize the homeless count to develop the programs particular to that aspect of it. Funding is a challenge for the communities. The reason why there's only 4 continuums of care within the region, and Glendale being part of SPA 2, which is part of where a lot of homeless services are handled in SPA 2, even then we're all struggling providing services to the participants with the funding gaps. What I can say is that City of Glendale has reduced veteran homelessness to 0, so we have 0 veterans in the community. We target specific families. If we find families within the city that are not in housing or any of our services, if they're living in the shelters or in their cars, we work to quickly get them into housing. That process takes about within a week to 2 weeks. Our families are in housing. And we coordinate with the school district to make sure they're in the programs. We do regionally coordinate with City of Burbank, Pasadena, as I said, but being that we're on our own continuum, we have to be able to address the needs within our continuum part of SPA 2 and coordinate regionally with SPA 2 leaders. That includes LASA. And Measure H funding, being that it's county sales tax, we are receiving some funding. Ideally, we would appreciate more funding to be able to do what we need to do successfully within our continuum, within our city limits. But I would be happy to come back with a report to indicate where we started back in 98 or so, where we are now, what type of programs we've developed. Since the inception of homeless services, we have 2 full-time year-round emergency shelters in our city of Glendale, one targeting domestic violence population, the other one general population. It's a total of 50 beds. We have over 150 permanent supportive housing units. We're lucky we received some landlord incentive program through our general funding, which provided incentives to our landlords. This year we gained about 20 new landlords willing to work with our population through participating, understanding that it's a team effort between case management and our team with the client that has a lot of special needs.
Just as a closing remark, I want to note that from the perspective of the county and the COCs, including Long Beach, Pasadena, Glendale, and then LASA, Glendale definitely stands out as a model and as a success story when it comes to addressing homelessness, and oftentimes is looked to as a generator of best practices, particularly for other cities and COCs throughout LA County. So overall, I definitely want to sort of commend the work of your department and of you specifically, because I know, again, overall the city of Glendale is really looked to as a model. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Also, you mentioned that veterans was at 0. Is that because of, well, the property at 311 Cypress, where I am, and also the veterans building that was done over on Salem? Is that what brought it down to 0?
We actually applied for specific funding for housing for veterans, and so as outreach team identifies the veterans, we work with them to place them in housing. Although we do advocate for any type of projects that are developed, including the Veterans Village, for any of our individuals that can qualify for.
Thank you.
Do you have a sense of how these numbers are going to change in the next few years? Are we going to see an influx of well, I'm calling it that because this is really a regional issue, and without regional coordination, one area providing services, you will have a lot of So do you have any indication, any ideas as far as how the numbers are moving?
I mean, from staff perspective, what we'd like to do is continue to educate and work with our landlords in the community to make sure that rents are consistent and not the rental market and the high rents impact regionally. It's not just the city of Glendale. So working with that aspect of it to ensure that affordable housing is our top priority, but at the same time working to make sure that our clients with mental health challenges are connected to the right resources. This year around, we will be targeting the at-risk population, as Mr. Corral defined, is our new population we're working with, and to make sure that in the event our families that are not able to pay their rent before they become homeless, we're able to transition them to different types of programming. Also working with our Vertigo Job Center, our Vertigo Job Center has implemented a program with Community Services and Parks where there is a pilot project is in training and employment for our homeless individuals to be able to gain employment training and hopefully gain employment, and that will be able to assist them becoming self-sufficient. So our goal is to reduce homelessness by prioritizing and targeting our resources to the need that is based on our homeless count from this year.
This may be not a question within the purview of this, but are you anticipating the possibility in next year's audit of having to deal with Prop 10 passing, which would obliterate Costa-Hawkins and open up local government action on rent control or other aspects of it?
I may have to defer that to my director. I think.
Well, actually, since it's next year, let's.
I just have a quick question here. So with these observations that were made, where they're going to be taken care of by almost all of them by the year end, will this improve the efficiency with staffing hours in regards that, you currently have 6 staff members and you are 1 staff short, and you are utilizing a finance person to do this, help out in the department. All these efficiency updates, would it help your department as a whole?
That's a great question. So to begin with, we've already implemented some changes. Part of this funding cycle for 2018 fiscal year, one of the requirements for the agencies is to develop cash support rather than in-kind support, which makes it challenging for us to have our clients access the third-party services, take their paperwork to the third party, bring it back to the case manager. I'm sort of explaining that because that's the challenge we're having, is dealing with our mental health clients who need to take paperwork, shuffle back and forth. However, implementing the cash has supported with that transition. We're also working with integrating the finance departments within our program team to be able to have finance folks deliver and handle all the match requirements rather than program folks. And that has begun already within the last 2 months. And we have been gaining match support within a monthly basis. So that we're implementing and seeing some of the changes now. As the program becomes a lot more competitive, we'd have to look at other means to be able to sustain and continue to successfully run the homeless programs.
With these great efficiencies, I mean, basically it's a win-win from both ends, where it improves the process in your department, but also it helps the clients faster, right?
Yes, sir.
I have a question regarding the the task plus time list. It says here that the homeless programs personnel provided tasks that total approximately 15,000 annual hours for 6 staff members, 5 of them full-time, 1 of them part-time. I'm trying to understand how that task plus time list, what that actually is representing. Is that just taking the total number of tasks that were completed and assigning some sort of hourly value to them, or did you look at each individual staff member and looked at what their responsibilities were and what tasks they had completed and added up those hours? Because 15,000 hours for 5 full-time workers and 1 part-time worker, and I'm not suggesting that that's not what actually happened, but that's a tremendous workload.
That's a great observation. And yes, we went through and we interviewed each of the staff members. We worked with Yvette. So basically we identified each of the tasks. They do have monthly objective lists, and went through and asked them to provide us with estimates for the amount of time for each task. So like we mentioned, because it wasn't previously recorded to that level, those tasks, we tried to identify the major tasks and provide estimated times. And then for each staff member, overall, we compiled the information to come to the total of 15,000 hours that you referred to.
Now, did audit evaluate whether the compiled total number of tasks, I mean, if that number, again, you know, I have to ask these questions. I'm not suggesting that it didn't actually happen, but you know, how approximate are we talking about?
Well, in some cases, like we mentioned, the state ESG and the Measure H are new projects, so time was estimated based on their estimated times on their similar grant-related responsibilities. But there was additional time that was accumulated because, as with every new program, there are new requirements. So they need to review the requirements and establish new contracts and systems and establish all of the benchmarks to review with staff to make sure that everything is being completed in accordance with the guidelines. So for specifically Measure H and State ESG, for example, I believe it's the Measure H that we don't yet have all the contracts for, correct, and don't know how many agencies we'll be working with. So we estimated the number of agencies that we would be working with in order to accomplish the objectives of the grant. So, but the other times that were related to the programs that we have been running, those were estimates provided by the staff, and we did go through and evaluate for consistency, as well as reviewing the list with Yvette to determine if those numbers need to be adjusted, because there is a learning curve. Like I think I mentioned, the agencies have turnover, but the City of Glendale has also had turnover. So to train staff to review those invoices and perform their daily work requirements also has a learning curve. Basically, it takes 1 full year to train an employee because of the different processes. Like she mentioned, there is a national competition. So to provide, to perform the work required for that national competition is one part of the year. And so we tried to specify a time frame where we could of when those different processes were being performed, so that hopefully they can, in those cases, identify on a monthly basis what the objectives of each staff person, what objectives need to be completed.
I'm curious. I mean, how much overtime was paid during the time? I mean, considering that we have two salaried staff members, 3 full-time hourly workers, and 1 part-time hourly worker, how much overtime was paid? You know, during the time that this audit covered. Do you have any idea?
I'll have to defer to Yvette.
It comes out to 20 to 30 hours minimum, right, per staff?
Chair Amirian, members of the committee, there is no overtime paid for any of the positions. There's 2 management positions, so my position and homeless programs coordinator is a management position, and we receive 60 hours of benefits for that. So the way it works is that we work as a team to get all the projects completed. We do utilize the volunteers for the homeless count, which supports the continuum of care. As well, we're lucky to have leveraging services from our finance department, city attorneys, our own department parks. Anytime there is a gap in our staffing level, we all we fill in the responsibilities as needed to be able to handle what needs to be handled. As Mr. Bolanikin mentioned, due to staff vacancy for the Measure H, we have a senior analyst person supporting with those efforts for Measure H and state until the new person is hired.
So, and thank you for that. So this 15,000 annual hours includes tasks that would be completed by volunteers and leveraged, you know, other leveraged members from other departments?
No, sir. The 15,000 hours are just staff assigned to the homeless services unit. The volunteers is only one date, about 2 to 3 hours during the homeless count for training, and maybe 4 hours for deploying for the homeless count. It's the homeless services staff handling the workload.
Okay, and you know what? Maybe we need to come back to this, because there's just a mathematical disconnect here, as far as I'm concerned. You know, we have 2 salaried employees and 3 full-time hourly workers and 1 part-time hourly worker, and we have 15,000 annual hours. Let's do this. Can we have just you know, some sort of clarity on that in a future meeting, yeah, and just bring us an answer of how that task plus time list was broken down, so that I have some clarity on how that actually translates to the number of hours these staff members are working. Because the committee asked a lot of great questions about the audit, but and covered a lot of the questions I had as well. But this stands out to me, and it's kind of the foundation upon which an efficiency audit would be based upon.
And as part of our audit, Chair Marion, we did make the recommendation, because like we mentioned, because the detail of the tasks plus the time have not been detailed in the past, our recommendation was to use our task and time list to evaluate, or to serve as a baseline, and on a going forward basis to establish timesheets that show each task and the specific amount of time as the staff go along and perform their tasks, to true up those numbers to what they actually spend. Because I'm sorry to repeat myself, because we didn't have those records, they were based on estimates. So until we know exactly what those numbers are, it is based on an estimate and serves as a baseline, so that the community services or Yvette can establish a baseline, or her expectation of how many hours a specific task should take, so that they can measure and address those issues that or efficiencies that they find that they can gain, either by more training or additional training, I guess, in sharing ideas across their staff of better ways to accomplish tasks. If one staff member is taking 3 hours to accomplish something, whereas one is taking 1, then sharing that knowledge and the tools that they have to improve their efficiency.
So what I'd like to see is some more clarity, because what I'm hearing right now, and what I think is possibly what's happening, is almost like a Scotty from Star Trek, in that, you know, it's going to take 4 hours to get the warp engines back online, and it actually takes 1 or 2. But that's not clear to me right now, because there's 15,000 hours and 5 full-time employees, and I'm trying to figure out how that connects. So if we can get some clarity on that number, and how it, the actual nuts and bolts of how that task plus time list was compiled, and how it came to be, and where that number came from, for a future meeting, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
And you also mentioned 2 salaried, 2 union, 3 hourly, and a part-timer.
Correct.
Can you do at least a abbreviated payroll audit, salary exempt, salary non-exempt, where you're doing this on 22 and a half days a month based on a 13-week quarter? How did you project on the front end, and how does the reality of a payroll audit match up with your projection?
I'm sorry,
I worked in payroll at Disney part of my 14 years. That's why I'm throwing some numbers at you. I'm curious, based on your projection, based on assumptions of other grant programs, and now that you have a year through, is there a way to see how your payroll record for these impacted employees matches up against your projection? And if some of this was study time to get used to the new program, are you assuming that that will decrease except for the new person you're going to hire?
So for, like I mentioned, we did go through with staff and we asked them to provide us estimates for the major tasks. And then we sat with Ms. Samvalian to adjust those numbers because there were learning curves. So we did see in some cases one staff was taking a lot more time than a second staff. So she did already reduce those numbers down to what she anticipates will occur in the future.
Thank you.
But as far as payroll,
It may not be necessary. Do you need to see a payroll audit or just?
those staff are based on hours, and the specific tasks aren't reported through payroll.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our next item, please.
So the second audit we completed this past quarter is the transformer shop inventory and control audit. I'll have Ani, our new internal auditor, come up to present the audit result to you.
Good morning, Chair Marian and Audit Committee members. My name is Ani Antanesian, and today I will be going over the results from the Transformer Shop Inventory and Controls Audit. We issued that on June 29th. I will be going over providing you with a brief background of the topic, as well as how the audit was initiated, the objective and scope for the audit, the methodology, the fieldwork steps performed, and finally the findings, and we'll have some questions at the end, of course. So what is a transformer? This is what a transformer looks like, a distribution transformer. The statement on the slide is a bit of a formal definition, but in less scientific terms. The mighty power lines that crisscross the city carry electricity at enormously high voltages from power plants to our homes. The appliances in our homes use voltages thousands of times smaller. Because you don't want to power your toaster straight from the power source, transformers are used to reduce the current. The responsibilities of the transformer shop specifically include receiving the transformers, testing them, inventory, issuing, and handling their disposal. The audit actually came about when the GWP director noticed an increasing number of transformer failures and transformer overload from the key performance indicators that were reported. So we set about auditing the inventory specifically and included a general review of the key performance indicators. The specific objective of the audit was to review the adequacy of inventory controls for managing the in-stock transformers, but we also included active transformers as applicable. The scope was limited to the in-stock transformers for fiscal year 2018. However, because we analyzed the database that is used for historical transformer statistics, it includes other periods as well. In regards to the methodology, we interviewed staff, specifically the electrical section, including business system support, as well as the finance department, and we consulted the city attorney's office regarding transformer inventory procedures regulations. We also decided to analyze the historical TILM data. TILM is the database used to inventory the transformers that we received, and we made a few observations through that as well. We also used data analysis to identify the number of PCB transformers. I'll get to that later, and to ensure that they are being properly handled. We also focused on transformer disposal procedures in light of the transformer inventory life cycle from procurement to disposal. Summary of results. Overall, we note that the inventory of transformers can be improved through documentation, oversight, and proper handling of transformers. Because the data analysis we performed yielded impactful results for operational efficiency, we honed in how we can make the data itself better, as well as the database that is used to collect the data. We identified some quality issues within the data set that need to be fixed, and we'll provide some type of analyses that can aid in making more informed decisions regarding transformer stocking levels and obsolete inventory reviews. The review of the transformer disposal process can also benefit from the finance department, providing oversight and through better tracking of the disposal process itself. The improvement opportunities we noted are in inventory, data quality, and database improvements, stocking levels, transformer disposal, PCB transformers, system user access, policies, procedures, operating guarantee, and finally the KPIs. And as you can see, we noted 8 priority 2 items and 4 in priority 3. Priority 2 being obviously the more risky items. So before we get into observation 1, here's a graph of the total in-stock transformers by age category. So they totaled about 900 and cost about $2.6 million to purchase. And as you can see, most of them are new. Some of the used ones are older. So transformers have been inventoried quarterly recently, but no records were kept. The same staff member that performed the inventory could also change the records in the database. The transformers were reconciled to a simplified list that we think could be enhanced by querying the database itself. And we noted, as you can see, some eroded labels on the transformers from the pictures. And locating the transformers at the yard was time-consuming sometimes as we were going through them. So we recommend that GWP document the quarterly inventory, the supervisor review any changes that are made to the database, and that the eroded labels be replaced and layout maps created to ensure that it's easy to locate them. As I mentioned, we did take a look at the database, TILM. It was created by a former employee in the 1990s, and it's customized to the GWP transformers for inventorying. As we were analyzing it, we noted that it had some data reliability issues due to the manual entry of some of its fields. About 900 transformers, about 6% of the total records had issues, and basically it can affect analyses like to understand what is in stock and the number of active ones, service history dates, for instance, the installation and purchase dates for the transformers. And for some records, data was simply not available. Because as part of the audit, we recommend that GWP use this rich data source to analyze for transformer statistical trends. We recommend that the data entry into the database be streamlined where possible and for staff to perform periodic data quality control. And the TILM database itself, we found that some of its functionality could be improved, even though it is great as it is. In the interest of time, I will not delve into the minutiae of the recommended improvements, but I will say that the recommendations seek to improve operational transparency. It provides delineated tracking of the relevant operational functions and broaden certain data input categories in order to more comprehensively capture events related to transformer servicing. The next, a little bit of background for the next observation. I wanted to go over some of the results of the data that we found. So this is a graph of transformers as they're removed by calendar year for the past 20 years. As you can see, removal kind of changes from year to year. But if you take a look at the dotted green line, that's the average age for when transformers are removed, and it's trending below 40 years. So that's about like the useful life of a city of Glendale transformer from what we could tell from the data. And the top line is the maximum age of a transformer. So some of them, can last up to 80 years. And the next graph shows the active transformers by age category. So these are all of the city transformers out there. They total about 9,000 some odd. And this is again by age category, and as you could tell from the last graph, it was about 40 year, and here you see we highlighted the 41 to 45-year-old, about 1,600 are in that age category. So we just wanted to provide you a little bit of what the analyses look like from just simply analyzing the data. And so we observed that this data was just not being used to identify these aging transformers like I showed, and to determine optimal stocking levels. We found that 2 types of analyses could be used to guide procurement decisions for transformers. So one would be to do a comparative analysis between what we have in stock and what we have out there by size, voltage, and age, and quantity, relevant transformer characteristics. And the other one would be to track the transformers that are nearing 40 years of age, like we showed. So we recommend that GWP use data analytics in general to increase operational efficiency, and specifically consider those analyses that are reviewed. We have already facilitated a meeting with our IPA team and GWP to implement this recommendation. So for the transformer disposals, we noted that the only way to identify that they were disposed was through actual hard copy records kept as attachments to manifests. The actual database had limited detail on the disposed transformers. For instance, we found that close to 200 transformers that cost around $300,000 did not have any servicing history in the database. So there were no installation or removal dates, but they were in the disposed category. So we couldn't really make a determination if it was just because of the data or they really weren't serviced but were disposed. As we also sampled some of the 2017 transformer disposals, and we confirmed that one transformer had been in stock for 38 years and was disposed, had never been used. Other transformers were disposed due to visible signs of inoperativeness, such as leaking or rusting. These transformers did not have any corresponding service dates, so we could not tell whether they had been used. And again, some more had, it was the same case. They were visibly damaged from sitting in stock for too long. So we recommend that policies and procedures state how it is determined to dispose of transformers, especially when they've never been used. And going forward, the database itself should track the disposed without use category so that later on management can filter through and understand some trends for that. And to combat the lack of service history issue, we recommend that prior to disposal, each transformer record be up to date, and that staff perform obsolete inventory reviews of the transformers so we don't get really old ones in stock. As we were reviewing the transformers that were disposed in calendar year 2017, we found a few procedural related issues. First, the city's property transfer disposal form was not being used to dispose of the transformers per city policy. And as per federal regulation, the earliest date of removal of PCB transformers should be listed on the mandated manifest prior to disposal. Furthermore, staff should ensure that transformers are placed in the correct status category in the database prior to disposing it. Last transformer disposal observation. GWP currently disposes the transformers through a vendor who pays the city equitable salvage value for applicable transformers. Per the contract, GWP can request up-to-date metal pricing prior to shipment. However, staff have not asked for this, but relied on the vendor to attach it as a line item. And the reason we're just concerned about this is because the city, we don't really have any website for metal pricing that we can check ourselves, so it's always good for them to provide us an authoritative statement for historical purposes as well. And we also discussed with the city's purchasing section the transformer disposal, and it turned out that they had auctioned transformers a long time ago. So we recommend that prior to any extension of the current agreement, that GWP work with the purchasing section to identify whether the existing city procedures can effectively meet transformer disposal objectives or whether we need the contractor. So I mentioned the PCB issue a few minutes ago. So PCBs are synthetic chemicals. They're no longer produced in the US, but they were previously used in transformer coolants and lubricants. They stopped being manufactured in the US in 1979 because of evidence that they build up in the environment and negatively affect health. PCB toxicity levels are regulated both at the state and federal level. The state of California regulates it at a more stringent level at 5 parts per million, whereas the federal is 50. PCBs do not pose a danger to health, provided that they're properly handled and contained and proper procedures followed in case of any leaks. Just during the audit, we wanted to make sure, how many we have and to ensure that the active ones are properly handled and there are proper procedures in case of a spill. So as you can see, there are about 303 of them. They're super old, manufactured prior to 1979, and GWP has proactively said that they will prioritize the replacement of these transformers going forward. And we consulted the city attorney's office for a legal opinion on the regulations involved that involve PCB spill response requirements. And for this next observation, we just recommend that the policies and procedures be updated with the city attorney's legal opinion. We also performed user access testing for the TILM database that I've been mentioning. We compared the list of users of the system to the current employee listing and found that 134 employees had access to TILM that no longer worked for the city. We also found 14 generic accounts in the city, which is against departmental policy. So we recommend that the TILM access be deactivated for terminated employees and that generic account use be discontinued.
Those are 14 active generic accounts? Those were 14
14 active ones, correct. Yeah. We also found that there were no documented policies or procedures for specifically the inventory operation of the transformer shop. We recommend that GWP document them and address the necessary operational elements. Furthermore, the city's financial system currently does not reflect the total value of the transformer inventory. We also found that the transformer disposal revenue was posted to the wrong account, and the finance department accounting for transformer useful life can be improved. We recommend that the accounting procedures as well be documented in the policies and procedures. This next one is very quick. We were reviewing some bid specifications to a 2018 transformer purchase order, and we just found that there was a warranty of up to 1 year. And while we understand that not many transformers can be serviced and fail within that 1 year period, but we did find 2 that met that criteria. The warranty was not used, so we just recommend that GWP ensure that the warranty is used where applicable. And the last observation, to end with what we began about, what started this audit, about the KPIs. So there are 2 related to the transformer shop. One is percentage of overloaded transformers, and the other is the number of transformer failures. And as you can see, that one, when you look at it, there's a big jump, but it just turned out that the methodology had been misapplied for the calculation, resulting in out-of-range numbers. So fiscal year 16 should actually be 1.5%, and the last year should be 0.96. So it all trends below 3%. And the other KPI, the transformer failures, that one specifically, the 19 we reviewed should have been 14. So we recommend that, because obviously management looks at these and KPIs are important, that they're documented and reviewed by a supervisor. And we also recommend that in addition to the number of transformer failures, that the rate of transformer failure be reported, because that's a common metric in the industry, as well, to provide some context for that. This concludes my presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions. Also in attendance are GWP staff, Daryl Hahn, Electrical Services Administrator, John Wanner, Electrical Line Mechanic Supervisor, and Peter Milroy, Electrical Test Supervisor. Thanks.
Thank you for that presentation. I've got several questions. So can we talk about disposal and what that process actually looks like?
Sure. So as transformers, they get removed from service, like out in the field. They come back, and they test for any PCB content, like I mentioned. And if they have PCBs, they get put on the manifest. That is, it's a federal requirement. And so all of the transformers that get disposed have to be manifested, and the vendor just comes and picks up the transformers. So.
Is there one vendor?
Yes.
Is there a process by which that vendor was chosen?
I believe there was a memo that I read about that. Daryl, did you want? When we were talking with GWP staff about the vendor, and as I mentioned when we spoke with the purchasing section, staff don't necessarily have that institutional memory, as most of them are new. So that's why we have a recommendation that they should consult with purchasing to ensure that whatever that the current vendor is disposing them, that whatever we have in the city in terms of procedural, operations for disposing the transformers, that if the city can't meet those requirements, then we should go to the vendor if we should extend that contract.
Who is the vendor?
It is Emerald Transformers. think that's their DBA name, and their main name is, yeah, that's the DBA that they go by.
So physically, the process, once it's determined that a transformer will be disposed of, how, what happens? The vendor shows up at the transformer yard?
Right.
Yes, is that the proper, and then they just pick up the transformer and go?
Right. Yeah, that's my understanding. I mean, we didn't specifically audit the disposal. This was an inventory audit,
Sure.
but we just touched on that.
I'm curious about
yeah,
the disposal.
Yeah.
What is the liability of a PCB spill?
What we've been told by GWP staff that the current active transformers that we do have do not pose any risk. So the federal regulations are actually very specific. It has to be about 10 pounds of material that leaks for those transformers that contain greater than 5 ppm. And staff have ensured us that none of the ones that we have can possibly have that much of a spill. It's just that we wanted to ensure that all the regulations are in place in the policies and procedures, and that should a spill occur, that they know exactly who to call in terms of regulatory agency response.
Observation number 11, that 2 transformers were disposed of in 2017 with having never been put into service, being less than a year old, and no warranty having done. Are there any further details about what happened with those 2 transformers?
Yeah, those transformers were actually quite a bit. I think those were disposed many years ago. I want to say like 20 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So the current staff at the transformer shop didn't really have knowledge, and the way it is tracked in the database, we can tell that from kind of the notes section. That's why we recommend that the functionality of the database be improved so that we can tell more details about these things.
And one last question for me. What's the actual, what are Emerald Transformers paying for each of these disposed transformers?
Yeah, so it's basically based on the KPA. They buy the copper that's valuable in the transformers, and it varies. I think the last pricing was about $1.35 per kVA, something like that.
$1.35 per.
Yeah, I can get back to you if you want, specific numbers. We have the schedule for that. I just didn't bring it with me.
Okay.
But
and you mentioned that we do have a recommendation about that pricing to be included.
Yeah, we do have a recommendation that staff ask the vendor for updated pricing, because it does change from month to month. The metal pricing changes. So we just want to, and also, like I mentioned, because we don't have the access to a website, we're not subscribed to check these prices, and you can't really go back and check what the pricing was, let's say, in June 2017, so that, the historical documentation should be kept.
And one last question. How secure is the actual the transformer, where the transformers are kept?
Yeah, so we looked into that. There's a camera that overlooks the yard, and there's footage kept for that, and access is restricted to only GWP staff. So we didn't necessarily see an issue with how, and I think we only noticed one transformer loss in the entire period that we looked at, since like the 1990s.
So since the 1990s, only one transformer out of all of the transformers had been, lost?
Reportedly lost, and
lost.
an incident was...
Everything else was disposed of?
Right.
Okay. Okay. Questions?
I have a question. Page 6 and 17, they have 2 different numbers. Can you clarify which is the correct one in regards to the price for those 766 new transformers? Because one says 2.6 million, the other one says 2.2 million.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it should be 2.2 million. I think that was typo. It's 2.2 million.
Okay, there's a typo. All right, so now, in regards to, I guess, the department itself, I mean, I see there's 25% that are over 40 years old, but then again, we have transformers that are in stock of 898 sitting in the lot, and you said the average useful life is 40 years. And, so by keeping this high inventory and then subject to having transformers that are just sitting there, and sometimes at the end of the day, you have to dispose them because something happens to them, whatever it is, why not utilize them and get rid of the old ones and update them with these new ones that are in stock?
I think that's a great question, and that's why we've made also recommendations about that, to do obsolete inventory reviews and to look at the data to figure out optimal stocking so you don't have old transformers sitting out there. So we also recommend that.
How long does it take to, how long does it take to procure a transformer? So I mean, I would guess that the process is probably lengthy.
It's a bit time consuming. I think it takes about 6 months. And the GWP staff actually told us that they are looking into getting a standard vendor, right, if I'm not mistaken, to shorten that time frame for procurement.
Is the high number of transformers in stock due to some sort of known like preparation of some sort of catastrophic threat? I mean, I'm trying to understand. There must have been a reason or some reason that the stock got as large as it got.
I mean, I think that
I mean,
when you're
maybe in
dealing
the
with
70s they were scared of nuclear
Right.
war, and
I think when
mean,
you're
don't-
dealing with the system reliability of an electrical grid, you always want to have spare transformers, and there will be cost of doing business of having some old transformers that will never get used. I think that's just the reality of it. But again, like I mentioned, we do want them to use the data and to be more stringent about the actual number that's needed, to be more in time with procurement rather than be project-based.
Yeah, but I think that question is a valid question because the way I look at the numbers, you have 10 times, or like the 10 times the replacement rate in your inventory right now, and that's like, I think it's a very large number. I had also another question because I read somewhere that you had 700 and something new, and then there were 132 that had been serviced at least once, and then in 2017, if I'm not wrong, 80 transformers had been replaced. So that's, you do the math, it's like 10 times, or more. I had a question, and basically I'm not really sure how this works, but when you purchase a transformer, the warranty kicks in at the time of purchase or at the time when it is installed?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's when it's purchased.
So then why we would want to keep 10 times the rate of replacement in inventory? And you said that the average age of the transformers is 40 years, and so that's the average of the 80 transformers that were replaced in 2000.
Right, and that's what the data shows. And as we also mentioned, something to keep in mind, the data has some quality issues. So this is just, based on what Tillam showed us. That's also just something to keep in mind. But yes, the average age was about 40. And I think when you look at some industry useful life for a transformer, it's actually a bit lower than 40.
And another point I want to add is, in addition to the total number of transformers, there are also different types of, with different KVAA. So we have an exhibit as a sample of a comparative analysis that we can do, and that's based on the each type and what's the other tech term?
The transformer size and the
Size and
secondary
type.
voltage that we have Appendix 2 in the audit, if you'd like to see more.
You mentioned that the total value of the transformers was not reflected in the city's financials. Is
Right.
there a reason for that?
Right. So the transformer shop is actually moving the way they're accounting for transformers used to be part of the transformer shop. Now it's moving to the GWP warehouse. So because of that, the city's financial system doesn't reflect the total of value, that 2.2 million that we're talking about. So those 766 transformers that we're talking about, they were purchased over a period of time. So they weren't purchased 2 years ago. It was since 1974, with a majority of those having been capitalized. So, you know, now they're trying to inventory it, so it's a bit of an accounting difference.
Yeah, they're a little unique in terms of when you buy them, you actually capitalize them versus having them sit in inventory because they're aging, even though they're not. They're sitting in the field at the yard, except not hanging on a pole. They're a little unique.
Okay.
And then when,
Go ahead.
How many years for the amortizing on a transformer?
I think accounting mentioned it was like 30 years, I think. I think it was 30 years. Yeah. And we have also some recommendations on that too, on that the useful life of the transformer, the accounting can be improved if, as the transformers are disposed, that GWP work with accounting to tell them how many are disposed each year so that they know the actual number, the useful life.
Have you checked with the municipalities nearby and if they use the same transformer, if they have records that are equivalent? I mean, Burbank, Pasadena, the hulking giant down south, Department of Water and Power, as to whether there's a comparable standard based on weather, rain. Pretty much the weather pattern within the county is the same across the county.
Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't do any benchmark analysis for how heat affects transformers, but it obviously does. Heat impacts the overload on the transformer, so it's less likely to last as long. Yeah.
I can tell you from my previous life in Burbank, very similar process.
Thank you.
So I noticed that this past year, 80 transformers were swapped out, and there's currently 898 in stock, so it's about 10 times the amount that was swapped out. Do we know, based on industry standards, if there's a certain percentage that's optimal or ideal, or is that part of the work that's currently being conducted?
From my research on industry practices for useful life of transformers, it's really hard to pinpoint because loading of transformers is different from utility to utility. I mean, a lot of research that I looked at was big utilities, and we can't really compare to those because they have different practices and procedures. But what we could say is, you know, I think the best way to figure out the useful life is just to look at our data and see what that tells us.
Sorry. Do you have any more? Just quick question. Do we know if there's any process of like inventory management, like, you know, it's what they call it, LIFO, last in, first out, or first in,
First in, first out.
First in, first out?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, so we actually checked for that. It's not reported because we, you know, we noticed that as we were analyzing, I think, about 10 years of data, that newer transformers were being, older transformers were being pulled first. So that was a general trend that we did notice, yeah.
One last question for me. Is one of the reasons you have such a large inventory on hand, I'm trying to remember step up, step down, if there's any kind of cascade even outside of the city, are you in a position where a cascade could take out a larger number of transformers than you'd normally lose, so you need that kind of backup in inventory?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Audit Committee members. My name is Daryl Hahn. I'm the Electrical Services Administrator at GWP. With respect to your question, and kind of to address some of the questions that have been about why we have so many transformers, As was mentioned earlier, we do have sort of these unique transformers where this one unique transformer is sitting in the basement of a building, for example, and it does it serves a critical load and has these unique parameters. So we will keep one of those on stock or a couple of those on stock. You multiply that by 30 or 40 or 50 times of these quote-unquote unique transformers, and pretty soon you have a bunch of transformers sitting in the yard that potentially may never get used or wouldn't get used for 20 or 30 or 40 years. So if you could please repeat your question so I can hit it address.
Was, what were you worried about if there was a power failure somewhere else on the grid and you had a cascade
right.
that shut things down, that you could in fact lose transformers for other than wear and tear?
Right. So in general, when we look at something like a quote-unquote cascade, if there's a grid issue, there are protective schemes in place that would de-energize those feeders to protect the equipment and obviously to protect customers and crews. So in general, we don't typically stock to anticipate a cascading failure of transformers specifically, but we, like I say, we do have these protective schemes in place to protect us against that.
And you just mentioned unique transformers. You're saying maybe the Americana Galleria transformers wouldn't match the neighborhood transformer versus one of our new Borg cubes. I'm sorry, that's my Star Trek name for all these large, giant square buildings we're putting in. So each one of those has a different uniqueness because of the load and the commercial versus retail versus home use?
Correct, correct. And so, again, you have the commercial and the large sort of industrial, the large residential, but then you also have what you would typically see just going down the street up on the poles. You have these little cans that sit on the poles. And each of those is often unique as well, not only in terms of the size or the voltage, depending on the voltage of the distribution lines. So as was mentioned earlier, there's this whole array of anticipated transformers that you might need to replace. And as Ani mentioned earlier, from a reliability perspective, you definitely want to keep those in stock.
Well, that helps, because initially when I was looking at the numbers too, it looked like we had 898 transformers versus 28 transformers, 13 B transformers, and however many variations you have on them. So,
sure.
So in a sense, you have, it's like A, B, C, AAA, AA, A batteries, but
50 different sizes.
50 different. Thank you.
Correct. And one of the things that this whole effort has sparked is a discussion about, can we, I don't want to say standardize, but can we reduce the number of these special quote-unquote transformers? And that does come at an additional cost, potentially, because you have these special transformers, and oftentimes they're in what we call a bank, so there would be 3 of them together. And so if one of those were to go, you need it to have the same specific parameters. The replacement needs to have the same parameters as the other 2 that are there. So one of the things that we're discussing, for example, is if one of those 3 were to blow, do we just replace all 3 of them with 3 similar quote-unquote off-the-shelf transformers, or do we go back to the special inventory and find the one unique transformer that can replace that as
the other reason why it takes 6 months to order is because you're ordering a transformer with a certain number of coils, certain number of feet of copper within it?
It depends. Oftentimes, I think the size will dictate the duration. So smaller transformers, maybe something that's in stock might be easier for us to get, but the larger ones for the Borg, the Borg ships that were going in, those might take a
used
little
our
longer.
quota of Star Trek analogies for today.
I think that's 3. I think that's 3 today.
I have a question. Does technology or state-of-the-art technology in transformers allow for efficiencies that were previously not possible? So, for example, consolidating 3 to 2 to 2 to 1 in terms of a new purchase, thereby streamlining the time it takes to purchase 3 versus 1 transformer in terms of a replacement. Does current technology allow for that, or has it always been the case and available?
In general, when we talk about, say, putting 3 transformers together, each of those transformers is operating, in layman's terms, at a different wavelength, if you will. And so you can't necessarily replace 3 transformers with 1 transformer that would do it all. And in terms of transformer efficiencies and that sort of thing, it's actually pretty old technology, and transformers in general really haven't changed all that much at a basic level. You can add some XM radio and that sort of thing, but it's not going to change the fundamentals of how a transformer works.
The physics of the physics.
Right.
And you were saying different frequencies. You're saying you could have a 220 and a 440. So one transformer would be taking care of special need copy machines or things that take a higher load versus standard wall socket.
In general, what we see is, you'll see a single transformer that might just serve a residence or something like that. And then when we see 2 or 3 together, those are generally larger loads, like something that's a pump or something like that, like an industrial load. So again, you would see those 3 together working in different phases, if you will.
Okay.
Just one question.
Yep, go ahead.
Do you guys utilize anything in regards to the Tri-Cities where, like, hey, Burbank, I need transformer A, B, Z. Do you guys have it? Go exchange or do some sort of program in that way?
We do have a mutual aid request program in place through SCAPA, and so that's typically only used for emergencies.
Yeah.
So, for example, in the upcoming heat wave, it's possible that we may see an uptick in the number of transformers that fail due to the heat. So we might reach out to our partners in Burbank or Pasadena and say, exactly as you described, hey, we have these certain types of transformers. Is this something you can help us with? John Wanner, who's back here, his team is also pretty creative about using what we have in stock to get the lights back on. It may not be perfect, but it's enough to get the lights on. We can order the transformer and then come back and put in the quote-unquote correct transformer.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Really
thank you.
appreciate
And thank you to Ani and her team as well.
it. Absolutely.
Great report.
Thank you, Ani.
All right, thank you.
Let's move on to item 6B.
Number 6B, fiscal year 2017-18 audit work plan review and proposed fiscal year 2018-19 audit work plan. Jesse Zhang, Internal Audit Manager.
Let me bring up the PowerPoint. So, good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. I prepared a very short PowerPoint presentation for this one just to lead the discussion. So basically, I think you've all very familiar with the annual risk assessment process that help us to come up with our annual work plan. So basically this year, again, we met with each department directors, and oftentimes the directors will bring their managers as well to our, this year we call it risk assessment workshop. So at this workshop, we discuss a number of questions, risk assessment questions. You may find the dozen questions in our exhibit number 3. And then at this workshop, we also review the project currently on their list, listed for their department. We assign risk scores, and then after assigning the risk scores, so we have go through this internal risk ranking process to prioritize, and then we make our initial selections of the project for the coming year. We then met with city manager to obtain her feedback on the priorities and the project we selected. So let me see. Within the report, we have an executive summary along with 4 exhibits. The first one is the last year's work plan reconciliation, then the proposed plan for the current year, risk assessment questionnaire, as I mentioned, and the updated audit universe as of now. So before we go over details of this year's work plan. I would like to highlight some of the things that we've done or changes we've made this past year. I call it Year of Innovation. So if you look at the second paragraph under the fiscal year 2017-18 work plan reconciliation, we have listed the activities or improvements we made during the past year. We've also participated in some departmental activities, such as learning audit innovation methods by attending quarterly convenience with the regional innovation team, and we, participated a human-centered design workshop to learn new audit approaches. On the list, I think I've mentioned quite a few of them, even last one, such as our new audit report format, our new electronic tools to improve our work paper quality, and then the risk assessment process is also being kind of innovated to provide the participant with real-time feedback on where their overall risk scores are for their department relative to the cities, with basically real-time scores. We automated the spreadsheet to be able to do that. And we also started to do continuous auditing, so that's exciting and challenging at the same time. But that's something we have to do. That's basically trend for the internal audit world. Last but not least, I would like to mention, we also implemented the new method of running this audit committee meeting. So thank you, the chair and each member of the committee to be part of our innovation effort. So now let's go over. For this year's work plan, we have included 9 new audit projects, 2 carry over from last year. One of them we just started, and one is almost finished, and you will hear it in our next audit committee meeting. 2 advisory oversight projects, 1 continuous auditing project. When we say 1, it's basically 1 category, so there are more small projects included. We have, actually, we didn't get a chance to report to you in the activity report, but you can read through them later on. But I just want to quickly mention that we had a training of the software, the audit software we have had for a few years, but it's underutilized. And with the starting conducting the continuous auditing, so now we'll have a better use of the software. So the continuous auditing projects we're going to do this year included the user access control audit, and also duplicate payment audit, and also we'll continue working on developing new scripts with the focus on identify risks associated fraud risk related. I think, and then of course the 4 internal audit, our internal projects, such as conducting these quarterly meetings, our quarterly follow-up process. I'm expecting that we probably spend a little more time this year in follow-up process to share our knowledge with the innovation and the performance team members and facilitate the implementation of the recommendations. So, let's see. That's a pretty quick report. If you have any questions.
Okay.
So Exhibit 4, I noticed for potential fiscal year 2018-2019, there's approximately 34 audit subject areas. Actually 51, 68, 85.
147.
147. 100, yeah, 100, yeah, exactly. So how, clearly that can't be done in 2018, 2019.
That's the complete
total
audit
universe.
universe.
All right.
So basically, we select 9 new projects from this list.
And is that
And
just,
those, if you can see, actually
right.
bolded projects. And then the
Exhibit
actual
2,
plan is
right.
in Exhibit 2. Thank you.
Right, no, I mean, I saw the 9 projects there, but I noticed that, for example, some were skipped over, even though the risk ranking.
That's a very good question. So as I explained in our, maybe I didn't explain clearly. So we go through this we have this list, you have the list in Exhibit 4 is based on the risk score. Yes, correct. And then after that, we go through this internal selection process. It's not necessarily the top 10 or 9 will be automatically selected. We also review review other factors as well, such as the departmental coverage. We don't want to, just audit parks, 5 projects for parks. So we basically, spread the resources, spread the pain. So that's one factor, and also how frequent that area has been audited. When was the last time when we performed the audit on that is also a factor being considered. I think that's, it's not automatically the top 10.
I have a quick question. I don't really exactly remember, but a couple meetings back we had one big audit item. Was that the
CDB?
vehicles audit or which I remember we had a quite lengthy conversation. Did we decide to bring that back for another? I don't exactly remember, but one thing that I remember was the number of hours the audit hours was like, over 1,000, which I remember that was like a very big item.
Talking about the fleet management.
So
Probably
is that the faster audit you're referring to? So I'm sorry, what is your question?
My question is that are we going, I have to go back, unfortunately, so sorry to ask the question without the proper information, but I wanted to make sure that, did we decide that we are going to revisit that issue later on, or maybe some of the recommendations to see whether or not that is moving forward?
Let's
the right
cover.
direction?
Let's actually cover that bring it up during staff comments. Let's go through this section, and then we'll.
Makes sense. Thank you.
And then we'll address that. Any questions regarding the audit work plan for fiscal year 2018, 2019? Okay.
Sorry. So the next step is after the acknowledgement of this committee, we'll note and file with City Council. We're scheduled to be on agenda about mid-August. So.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move on to item 6C, please.
6C, fiscal year 2018-19, city budget adoption update. Audrey Isayan, Deputy Director of Finance.
Good morning, Chair Amirian and members of the Audit Committee. My name is Audrey Isayan. I'm the Deputy Director of Finance. And today we prepared a brief presentation for you for the 18-19 adopted budget. And here to make the presentation is Mari Karamian. She's a budget analyst who played a key role in the 1819 budget adoption, so I wanted her to make the presentation for you this morning. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mari Karamian up for a presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Audit Committee. My name is Mari Karamian. I'm a budget analyst at the city's Administrative Services Department, and I'm here today to present to you an overview of the city's fiscal year 2018-19 adopted budget. With this presentation, I will first be going over some of the key dates during the budget process and on our budget adoption calendar. Then I will be presenting to you the fiscal year 2018-19 adopted budget, including a summary of appropriations for the city's general fund, as well as all funds citywide. We will also be looking at the city's authorized full-time position count. And then finally, I will go over a brief summary of the capital improvement program for the fiscal year 2018-19. For the fiscal year 2018-19, we held three budget study sessions in the month of May, where we presented City Council with details regarding the city budget, including the general fund, the non-general fund departments, as well as the city's capital improvement program. We had our budget hearing on May 22nd, and following that was the budget adoption on June 12th. Here in front of you is the summary of appropriations for the general fund for the adopted fiscal year 2018-19, as well as fiscal year 2017-18 budget for comparing purposes. Just to go over some of the major changes within the departments, as you see for administrative services, there was an increase of $787,000 compared to the prior fiscal year. Most of this increase was due to the Finance Munis team that was previously being charged to the Tyler Munis project is now being brought back into the general fund for part of the fiscal year 2018-19 budget year. Another reason to this increase is one vacancy citywide that was redirected to the Administrative Services Department for the Accounts Payable Technician 1 position. Looking down for community development, you see an increase of $1.3 million compared to that of the prior year. Part of this increase is once again 4 vacant positions citywide that were redirected to this department, specifically in the planning section. And the entire $1.3 million is not just these 4 positions. There's also some regular salaries and benefit increases, including pension costs and some of the internal service health benefits that are provided. For the fire department, even though it's 1.8% increase only, but there is 1.1 million increase compared to that of prior fiscal year. Most of this is just regular salaries and benefit increases, as well as pension costs and costs related to workers' compensation fund. Moving along, the police department, you're seeing quite an increase of $6.7 million. For this department, we actually had one addition of a full-time salaried position of a school resources officer. And other than that, the department also had additions in hourly wages and overtime, as well as their PERS costs and costs related to MOU agreements such as COLA. For police, for the GPOA employees, they had a 3.5% COLA adjustment that was added to their budget for fiscal year 18-19. In the transfers category, you see a $1.3 million increase. This is mainly due to the expected increase in the amount for the Glendale Successor Agency loan repayment. The transfer that you are seeing is a 20% transfer that goes out to the Low and Moderate Housing Fund. In total, the adopted budget for the general fund for fiscal year 2018-19 was $227.8 million, which is an increase of about $12.7 million compared to that from prior fiscal year. Here you see a summary of appropriations for all city funds, including general fund. Just to go over some of the funds specifically, you see the special revenue funds had an increase of $12.6 million. The items in this fund are mostly funded through grants, as well as through any special revenues that are received that need specific tracking. The reason to the increase of $12.6 million mostly is due to the Housing Assistance Fund, which had an increase of $5.5 million, and that is due to their anticipation of receiving more revenue for the year. So since a lot of the funds under this category are grant funded, a lot of the appropriation is related to the revenue to be received for that year. For the debt service fund, the city has currently one debt service fund, and it is to pay for the police building. There is an increase of $397,000 compared to that of prior year for the payment for the year. The capital improvement funds, you see an increase of $12.4 million. We had some major projects budgeted for fiscal 18-19 for these funds, some of them being the Fremont Park renovation of $5.5 million in total. We had $3 million for the Maryland Paseo Alley. These projects I will go over later on during the CIP section. And then we had $2 million budget for the Central Park Block project. Moving on to the proprietary funds, these funds, unlike the governmental funds, they rely on fees that are charged to external and internal customers. External customers in regards for enterprise funds, which are the water and power, the water and electric, sewer, refuse, as well as the fire communications fund. And you see an increase of $5.7 million there for these funds, and most of them is due to multiple capital improvement projects that are within these funds, such as for the sewer section with the Los Angeles Glendale Water Reclamation Plant, as well as the Hyperion Wastewater System project. It is important to mention that even though there is capital improvement funds has a separate section, we do have other capital improvement projects under either special revenue funds or enterprise funds, depending on the revenue source that comes in. For the internal service funds, these are basically the customers for the internal service funds are the city departments. Some of the funds that are included here are the ISD rates, building maintenance, as well as some of our benefits such as health, dental, vision, workers' compensation. You're seeing a $6.5 million increase under this category, and this is mainly due to the ISD infrastructure fund, which is totaling to an increase of about $4.9 million for fiscal year 18-19 compared to that of the prior year. And for this fund is basically for the PCs, computers, or any such items that are provided to the departments. In total, the adopted fiscal year 2018-19 citywide budget was $887.3 million, which is an increase of $50.3 million compared to that of prior fiscal year. Here you're seeing our authorized full-time position count going back to fiscal year 2006-2007, just to provide you a little history. For fiscal year 2018-19, we did add one position in the police department of a school resources officer, as mentioned priorly. This position brought our position count to 1588, which is an increase of one position from the prior fiscal year. Over here, you see that this is our capital improvement program for fiscal year 2018-19. As you see, there's multiple projects or amounts budgeted in specific different funds, totaling to $70.8 million. Out of this amount, $19.2 million is for the general fund capital improvement. Moving forward, I will go over some of the major projects, just so you don't I don't have to go over to every single detail, because there are many projects under this program. So the Fremont Park renovation project is currently funded by the CIP General Fund, as well as the Parks Development Impact Fee Fund. And the life-to-date budget for this project is $6.15 million, with the $5.16 million remaining. And the adopted fiscal year 18-19 on top of this is $5.5 million. The I-210 freeway sound wall, which is for the design of the sound wall around both sides of the I-210 freeway. It's a new project. It's in the Measure R Regional Fund, and the amount for this is $4.5 million.
So this would be on the other side of the two, going towards Pasadena?
Both sides. For the GTV6 control room relocation, this is in the Cable Access Fund, and this is just for the relocating of the GTV6 room, as well as any construction costs that are related to this. The total of $850,000 adopted for fiscal year 18-19. The Central Park Block project, this is a master design as part of the proposed Armenian American Museum. There is there was already $513,000 budgeted previously, with a remaining budget of $153,000 and another $2 million adopted for fiscal year 2018-19. For Maryland Paseo Alley, this is the enhancement of the district around Maryland through infrastructure, public art, as well as design. There is no prior year appropriation, but there is adopted fiscal year 2018-19 appropriation of $3 million. The purchase of Maryland retail units, which is for related to the project previously, is there's no prior year appropriation. The fiscal year 18-19 appropriation is $1.5 million. Next, we have three street rehabilitation projects in the state gas tax fund for the Verdugo, the Highland, as well as the San Fernando, with $1 million for the Verdugo in the adopted 18-19 budget, 1.15 for the Highland Avenue, and $2.2 million for San Fernando. The Hyperion wastewater system, as well as the LA Glendale water reclamation plan, are the two major projects in the sewer fund. For the Hyperion, there is prior year budget of $23.25 million, with a remaining budget of $1.87, and a new adopted appropriation of $2.5 million for 18-19. For LA Glendale water reclamation plant, there's $21.5 million prior year appropriation, with a $5.7 million remaining, and an additional $12.8 million adopted for fiscal year 2018-19. Some projects in the Glendale Water and Power funds. For electric depreciation fund, you have the electric vault replacements, as well as the airway interconnection improvements. So for the electric vault replacements, you have prior year appropriation of $684,000, with a remainder of $83,000, and a newly appropriated budget of $1.5 million for 2018-19. And the airway interconnection improvements, you do not have prior appropriation. We do have an adopted fiscal year 2018-19 budget for $1.6 million. And finally, the pipeline management program for the water depreciation fund. This is just to replace and install. It's for the replacement and the installation of the potable main, and you have prior year appropriation of $201,000 with $9,000 remaining as of March 31st, and an adopted fiscal year 2018-19 budget of $4.7 million. And with this, I conclude my presentation. I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I have a quick one. What is this airway interconnection again? This is
the airway.
I think it's just a distribution, transmission line replacement.
It's to make improvements to the control equipment.
What happens if the gas tax is pulled because it failed, or the initiative, one of the 11 left for November. If that gas tax is terminated, then the 2 new items will go back into next year.
Well, I think,
crossed.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I think if the question is if the gas tax increase is repealed, there'll still be a remaining gas tax, so we would just dial back the revenues that we receive and the projects that we can do with those. Clearly, with the increase, we would plan on doing more projects with the increase in revenue, more street and sidewalk improvements.
Thank you.
I noticed that there's a 6% increase for all funds. Yet there's also, or the pattern of sort of decreasing full-time positions over the past, I don't know, 10 years. Lost about 300 full-time positions. So we're increasing expenditures. We're decreasing full-time positions. I guess we added 1 from last year. Is most of that difference accounted for in terms of pension, and then also some of these new sort of infrastructure projects? It seems like there are many. Is that kind of what accounts for, or the majority of the increase, if you were to trend it?
The majority, yes. Well, pension has a lot to do with the increase, depending on, since the rates have been increasing from year to year. But also the decline in the number of positions for the city, which was back in 12-13, beginning 12-13. After that, we've been trying to add as many positions as we can, bringing us back to our previously authorized position counts. But in regards to the increases to the overall budget, as you mentioned, the PERS rates as well as some of the internal service benefit rates, such as medical funds and medical rates and workers' compensation, that all adds up to this increase, not to mention some of the MOU increases, which are cost of living adjustments that have been receiving from year to year. For fiscal year 18-19, the GCA, GMA, as well as hourly employees have received 1.5%. And then GPOA, as mentioned, employees are receiving 3.5%. So all that adds up to the overall increase of the budget.
Chair Mirian, Audit Committee Member Roger Farrell. The 6% you're referring to is across the board, so it does include a lot of operations and capital in there. The general fund specifically has more salaries. It's 75-25 salary based, but the non-general funds are mostly operational. So the 6% that you're looking at is across the organization, and it covers all kinds of things. Right. But our cost drivers are our pension costs, are our rates that we charge for internal service. But we do have a lot of grant projects that you're seeing in that 6%, a lot of capital that you're seeing in that 6%, and a lot of just staffing across the organization.
Right, so.
Okay.
And to further, I doubt whether we'll ever get back to the staffing levels we were. It's just not possible. We have to have a balanced budget every year. We added back 1 this year, and that was for basically an SRO back for the schools. But to go back to the 2005-06 staffing levels would be impossible with our cost structure.
What is the preferred or the ideal number of full-time positions that it sounds like we're working back towards?
Well, I think our ceiling has been set, line in the sand is 1,600. So whether we get close to that in the upcoming years, quite honestly, those are authorized. We sit now with filled about 14.
About 1489.
1489. So there's always a fair amount of unfilled positions, whether that's people moving on or people retiring. There's always a fairly good buffer in terms of citywide vacancies in every department. I know, and the lead time in filling some of these positions is fairly excessive with police and fire in particular. The background checks and what they go through to fill a position is pretty time consuming.
If you end up with a new source of income that ends up collecting in the general fund and is reflected on the next year's budget. I'm thinking of if the thing works in Pasadena and 3 members of the council agree that a few shops with settled green signs show up in the town, that's a new source of income.
Perhaps. I was thinking more of the 3/4 cent sales tax that the council authorized the other night, but something less green. That's a council decision whether they want to offer that as an option to the residents. Plus, the taxation would be a 218 issue and have to take to citizens for a vote whether that would be taxed or not. Interesting, the kind of the structure of which taxes in terms of marijuana and cannabis. There seems to be an overzealous idea that the tax will produce a lot, and they're woefully coming in way lower than estimated statewide. So it's an interesting dynamic, and those that rush in to tax it and expect this very high tax revenue, and they're only coming in at about 2/3.
I think most of the early money is coming into the Redwood counties.
Yeah.
Since this has been the number 2 cash crop off the books in California for the last 10 years.
Well, in all fairness, though, the reason why you're seeing the revenues not coming in from cannabis in the way that it's intended or expected or projected is because of, particularly in our sort of larger neighbor to the south, is inefficiencies when it comes to producing permits. So just kind of tempering that observation a bit.
Yeah, they are having a debate between the mom and pops that were in this for 20 years when it went to medicinal and then went to recreational. And some of them feel they're being penalized when they should have priority against major companies that are rolling into the market. So you're right, there's some growing pains between the various council districts as well.
And municipalities.
Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's move on to item 6D, please.
Number 6D, report from Vavrinick Trine and Day and Company, LLP, on the audit of fiscal year ended June 30, 2018. Shujin Lee, Deputy Director of Finance.
Because I have a broken toe. So, good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Shujin Lee, and I'm the Deputy Director of Finance. I'm here today to present information about the city's fiscal year 2018 audit. So, the city's current external auditor is Vavrinick Trine Day and Company, in short, VTD. So, for the fiscal year 2018 audit, the VTD staff has been in the city in May for 2 weeks to do their preliminary field work. And their main focus was the city's internal audit, was the city's internal control. So they met with various department staff, such as HR, ISD, legal, and of course, finance. And then in August or September, they will be back in the city again to audit the city's federal grants. And then in October, when the city's first draft of the comprehensive financial report is completed, they will be back in the city for another 3 weeks to finish the audit. And we expect to receive the opinion letter from them by the end of November, and we expect to go to council to present the audited financial reports in early December. And then next January, during your quarterly meeting, we'll be here to present you the audit result. And then next, VTD, Mr. David Showalter, our engagement partner, will give you a presentation for their audit plan. And at the end, we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Good morning.
Welcome, Mr. Showalter.
Thank you for having us. You have a handout. This is a summary of our audit plan for the year. I think we also have a more formal letter that we also provide as well. But this is a summary of our audit for 2018. And the first page, or the second slide, is the audit team. I'm the audit partner on the engagement, so I have the ultimate responsibility for the audit and signing the opinions. We have another partner involved. He's the technical review partner. He assists with the quality control review as well as any consultation on technical matters. Lauren Stapleton is the audit manager, and she's in audience today. Renita Dukes is our audit supervisor. She'll handle the day-to-day of the audits, all the audits that we're doing, and then we'll have various staff that will be assigned. We typically have around 3 or 4 staff that are on site full-time during the time that we're out here in the field. The next slide is the scope of our audit. As you can see, we have quite a few audits that we're completing. So you're all familiar with the comprehensive annual financial report. That's the main financial statements for the city. We also conduct the single audit, which is an audit of the city's federal grants. And then we also conduct an audit of the standalone enterprise reports for the power utility fund and the water fund. We also do procedures over the city's HUD React submission. So this is the Section 8 program and the other housing programs that get submitted to HUD. There's certain procedures that we do as the independent auditor through that process. And then we also do a NTD audit. This is for the Transportation Department. And then we also audit the, I guess it's the ISIS JPA or the ISIS Systems JPA. So our responsibility under generally accepted auditing standards is to design the audit and to design procedures to obtain that understanding of the city, ideally to obtain reasonable but not absolute assurance as to the absence of material misstatements in the financial statements. So part of that process is, as Ms. Shuden mentioned, we've already been out during the preliminary phase of the audit. That process is to get an understanding of any changes that have occurred with the city. Obviously, being the ongoing auditors of the city, we have a lot of knowledge already that we've gained from our previous audits. But that process of sitting down and meeting with various individuals within the city, all the way from the city manager all the way down to individuals within different departments, just to get that understanding of anything that's occurred during the year, anything that's going to result in a risk that we need to address in our audit. Primarily looking at what has happened in the prior year, what's happening in the current year, things that potentially could have an impact on the financial statements as a whole. Part of that process is looking at internal controls. So I think we've kind of talked through this in the past about the fact that we go into different departments and we're looking at those internal control environments that could have an impact on the overall financial statements, such as the HR function, the payroll function, financial reporting, procurement, the revenue cycle, treasury management, those areas that actually have a direct impact on the financial statements, looking to make sure that there are controls in place that are designed to detect, correct material misstatements in the process. Also, looking for instances of non-compliance and making sure that there's controls in place that would mitigate those instances of non-compliance. Also to identify controls to make sure that those controls are designed to mitigate the risk of fraud and theft. Ultimately, we're opining on the financial statements based on our audit. We're expressing an opinion on compliance with the major programs. And then we also review the city's financial statements. And as part of that review, there is also additional information that's provided in those financial statements that we do not opine on, such as some certain supplement information, which is the management's required analysis, and certain statistical information and transmittal letter information. They're required to read that information, but we don't opine on it. And then there's other supplementary information that we do review, which is like all your non-major fund information. We do opine on that information in accordance with the in relation to the financial statements taken as a whole. So the next slide is our responsibility, again, under generally accepted auditing standards. At the conclusion of the audit, we will communicate these items with you in a separate letter. And so when we do come back in January, we will respond to these various categories, discussing the qualitative aspects of the accounting policies and estimates and no disclosures that are in the financial statements. We'll come back to you to notify you whether we had any difficulties with the audit, whether there's any uncorrected or material corrected misstatements, any disagreements with management, and so forth. So at this point, we have nothing to report to you under those categories. So the plan, scope, and timing of the audit. As Shuden mentioned, we have been out. We started in May to start the planning in the interim phase of the audit. And then we'll be back out in August, September to conduct the compliance audit for the federal programs. We're back out in October for about 3 weeks to conduct the final phase of the audit. At that point, management has compiled and prepared the trial balance, closed the trial balance, has prepared the draft of the financial statements. So we usually start our first week of audit, and then through the second week of audit, management is able to provide us with that first full draft of the financial statements. At that point, we start going through and reviewing that draft, providing comments back to management, and at the same time, we're going through and reviewing and auditing the financial statements. And then the goal is to issue the final opinions and deliver those reports by November 21st, 2018, which is right before Thanksgiving. And then the single audit will be done at the same time, and then the HUD REACT agreed upon procedures will be completed before March 31, 2019, which is the deadline. The next slide is just an overview of our procedures that we perform at the various stages of our audit. The risk assessment phase or the interim phase, which is what we've completed and we're still ongoing, is updating our understanding of the city, its internal controls, and other external factors that are affecting the city. Updating our understanding of the city's internal control environment, accounting systems and control procedures, performing risk assessment to determine the nature, timing, and extent of our audit procedures, completing our overall audit plan, and including procedures to identify, to address those identified risks. And then obviously doing what I'm doing right now is having that required communications with you. On the final phase of the audit, we perform the audit procedures and evaluate those results, review the financial statements and subsequent events. Management provides us with a management representation letter, and then at the conclusion of the audit, we can provide any insights as far as the audit goes. Over the course of the process, we could be coming across areas that are of improvement, and then we communicate that with the city on an ongoing basis, and then at the conclusion of the audit, we will communicate that on a more formal basis. And then in the prior year, we did have items of recommendation, and then part of our audit this year is to follow up on those items to make sure that those items have been implemented. And then the reporting phase of the audit, we'll be issuing opinions on the city's financial statements under generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. We'll provide a separate report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. We'll also provide a separate report on our opinion on compliance for each of the major federal programs, as well as our required communications at the conclusion of the audit when we meet with you. And then we provide management with comments and recommendations as well. So as far as this year's audit, some of the areas that are different from the prior year, if you look at the next slide, slide 9, these are new accounting pronouncements that are going to be impacting the city's financial statements this year. One in particular is Governmental Accounting Standards number 75, which deals with the recording and recognition of the other post-employment benefits liability. In the past, the city has recorded a other post-employment benefits obligation, which is basically the accumulated amount of what should have been contributed to the OPEB plan but hadn't been contributed, so that's recorded as a liability on the balance sheet. That liability will be restated and come off the balance sheet, and another liability, which is effectively, this is what the city kind of owes the plan in order to make it fully funded, which is approximately about $16 million last year. And so the city's working through the process of getting that actuary report completed. And then this year, as part of their audit, we'll be reviewing the recording of that, the disclosures, and making sure that it's accounted for in accordance with the accounting standard. GASB 85 addresses, clarify that certain money market investments and participating interest earning investment contracts may be but are not required to be measured at amortized cost. And then also there's some classification of the employer paid member contributions for OPEB, as well as certain information that goes into the required supplement information and how that's presented. So the omnibus is really just a kind of a going back and fixing the previous accounting standards. So it's kind of what I refer to as a cleanup accounting standard. And then GASB 86 deals with certain debt extinguishment issues. So this would be more of a facts and circumstance implementation. If the city were to use its existing resources to call and pay off its outstanding debt, bonds, then without going out and issuing new debt, then this standard provides some guidance on how to properly classify that, and then what constitutes a irrevocable trust from the perspective of when you put assets and you defease a bond. When you put assets into an irrevocable trust to legally defease a bond, those assets in that trust need to be of a certain type and characteristic so that there is little risk with respect to ensuring that you're going to get the yield that you've expected out of those investments. So that provides some guidance on that. And if you flip the page, we've got the GASB is continuing to crank out the new accounting standards. So in fact, they just did one very recently last month, so it's continuing. But starting in the next few years, we're going to have a few more significant accounting pronouncements. I would think that the ones that are going to be more impactful to the city are going to be GASB 83, which deals with certain asset retirement obligations. And we just kind of listened to a presentation on the potential costs of disposing certain assets. So you kind of got a taste of what this standard is kind of about on a grander scale, though. Kind of looking at things on a much more larger scale where you got larger capital assets out there that at some point you have to dispose of those capital assets, and there could be some legal requirements of how you dispose of them, and those obligations, if they exist, potentially would need to be recognized as a liability today before you've even disposed of the assets or before the asset has gone through its entire useful life. And then GASB 87 dealing with leases. So a lot of our governmental agencies that we audit, especially in the healthcare and different types of industries, lease a lot of assets, and they lease a lot of also office space. So depending on where you guys are in that, leasing capital assets has always been an item that you recorded on your financial statements as a liability and an asset. But when you get into the operating lease side of it, it's always been an operating expense, and it's never been recognized on the balance sheet. So this is going to recognize that lease obligation on the balance sheet as a liability, along with a corresponding asset, which is really the right to use that asset. So that's another area where we're talking with our clients and asking them to really start looking into it, because if they don't have a very good system to track all of their leases, they need to start working on getting that inventory put together. The other standards that are coming up, certain disclosures related to debt, including direct borrowings and direct placements. This is kind of what we see, where you decide to go out to market, you're going to sell bonds, but then you sell them directly to a bank. So they actually don't even go out to the market. They just go directly to one purchaser. So the GASB wants additional disclosure on those types of debt financing arrangements. And then the one that was just issued, dealing with accounting for interest costs incurred before the end of the construction period. Under current accounting guidance, when the city, let's say the city were to issue long-term debt to construct a capital asset in its enterprise funds, the cost of that interest incurred during the construction period gets capitalized. And there's a couple of different ways that it gets capitalized under current accounting guidance. So the idea is that you're getting the asset ready for use, and so that interest cost that you're incurring during the construction phase, you've issued the bonds, you're incurring some accrued interest on those bonds, that would get capitalized and rolled into the cost of the asset. Under this new accounting pronouncement, they're basically indicating that when you do issue that debt to finance the cost of construction, when you do incur that cost and pay that interest expense, it just gets expensed and it's no longer required to be capitalized as part of the asset. So to me, that's one that a lot of my clients struggled with, because it's one of those things that might get done at the end of the year as opposed to being done systematically during the year. So this is something that could be a time saver for some of my clients. And then the last one, GASB 84, dealing with fiduciary activities. Basically, the city has a set of fiduciary funds in its financial statements. All this is doing is really kind of clarifying what are fiduciary funds and making sure that we're using the fiduciary funds in the proper way in accordance with accounting standards. So other than that, those are all the new accounting pronouncements. I'm sure the next time I meet with you, there'll be probably a half a dozen more coming up.
The rate they're going.
Yeah, the rates are going, but if you have any questions, I'm glad to answer this for you.
Thank you for coming
All right,
in,
thank you
and
so
thank you
much.
for the presentation.
Appreciate
Really
it. Thanks.
appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to item number 7, please.
Number 7, Audit Committee and for staff comments.
Thank you to staff and to our guests today for their presentations and coming in. This meeting's usually a long one, and I appreciate everybody's patience in getting through what are important matters and questions. I do have one comment. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 22nd. I have a conflict on that date, and so I wanted to propose moving that meeting date back, or creating a special meeting technically, 1 week after on the 29th, and wanted to get some input from my fellow committee members and see if that would even be a possibility from the use of the room and staff. So.
Actually, I checked the availability of this room for October 29th, and it's available. Mondays, this room is available. Usually.
Wonderful.
So
would anybody be opposed to meeting on the 29th? Do we need a motion? Okay, so let's plan for that, please, Mary.
Okay, so the next meeting of the Audit Committee will be October 29th at 8 a.m.
Correct.
You mean people aren't fighting us for 8 o'clock in the morning on Mondays?
No.
Go figure.
Okay. Any other comments?
I have one. When we were given our our pads, I asked the question of if a commissioner wanted to purchase a pad to get more used to it, were we able to purchase it, personal funds obviously, through the city using the city's discount? And that was a question that someone was going to check on. Do we have an answer yet?
Yes, I did check with ISD. There's no discount for the.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh boy, when I was at Disney, I want to tell you, Apple gave us a 30% drop-off.
Disney's a little bit bigger than City.
Yes, no, I
very
understand
nice.
that. When I was working there, they had 32,000 employees in Burbank and Glendale, yes. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to go back to my earlier comment. I actually tried to pull up the report from our last meeting, which I think it was in July 24 of 2017. Unfortunately, the link to the audit activity report is not active, or otherwise it doesn't come up. But if you can activate that, I'll try to better educate myself, and then maybe I can send an email asking maybe.
Yeah, please do send me an email.
But if will the link be active? That's my question right now.
To the last.
Well, it's just like I said, July 24, 2017.
So we started this iPad version of audit committee meeting last quarter. So we did ask ISD to reload the previous meeting package, but they only did it for that one extra meeting. So anything going beyond that, he didn't do the iPad version. But if you would like us to,
you can likely
not
find
the
that on.
iPad
You can
version.
likely find that on the internet.
That's what I'm trying
On
to
the
do.
city's-
So I'm clicking on the link that is supposed to take me to the city website, and it doesn't.
If you start with the city website and then go to archival meetings, you will likely be able to download that from there. And if you can't, we can forward you the hard copy somehow.
I think it's a Wi-Fi issue because I was able to
Yeah.
click on it at home.
It says Glendale, like our website, and then agenda and minutes,
Mhm.
and then I'm clicking on audit committee. And
Maybe I
then-
can pull it up.
So,
Audit committee,
and then 2017,
17,
this is the July one.
this one.
So it
right?
opens the agenda, you can just see that, but when you click
Mhm.
on that report, if you click that first item,
This one.
mhm,
It's the coal mine.
oh, is that it?
There we go.
Okay, maybe I have to try it.
So it was the
for the
faster one.
computer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the faster audit. I think we're currently the department is in the process of implementing those recommendations. And as I mentioned earlier, when we developed the audit work plan, other factors we considered is basically, how frequent we re-audit that area. And then I don't see we're going to audit that area right away. We give them time to implement those recommendations. And also, the city is in the process of hiring a fleet manager. So I'm sure he will, work with us on implementing those recommendations and maybe beyond. Yeah, I think that's pretty much the status on that one. And then, as you know, that we do have that resolution on if any other issues not being implemented within 2 years or 3 years from the report issuance, the director of that department will be invited to the meeting and answer questions in terms of what's the plan for implementing those recommendations, or if at the 3 years mark, we'll stop following up and then give us a reason why.
I had 2 requests for clarification, and I just want to make sure that those are addressed during our next meeting. One was the disconnect between the 15,000 hours and the number of positions. I'd like to see some mechanics behind how that number was gotten to and how it actually corresponds to the number of hours that were worked by those staff members.
Just by way of requested follow-up, we can certainly provide information to you in advance of the next meeting.
Great.
And if you would like to have additional discussion, then we can certainly work with you in
Agendizing it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
If you're satisfied with the response and you don't feel like there needs to be a lengthy discussion. you
Perfect.
don't have to put it on the
Perfect. And then in the same vein, the details regarding the disposal of the transformers and how that one company came to have that contract and what they're charging. There just some clarity and some meat behind that particular issue.
Would it be appropriate to see if copper is in the renewed charming friendship between nations on trade tariffs? Or is that not something we need to worry about at this point?
No, I mean, I think that's going way too detailed, but, given the fact that we were talking about inventory and there were some issues with, there were some control issues in terms of the inventory, I'd like to have a better understanding of what the cost is to the city, or what the vendor's paying to the city in order to dispose of those transformers, and how that deal was in place. So, in the same vein, if I could get that information and then, can decide whether or not it needs to be agendized and followed up on.
Okay, we will provide an email response to your questions first, then you will tell us if we need to agendize it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, let's move on.
Number 8, new business.
Okay, and let's move on to number 9, adjournment.
Number 9 is adjournment.
Motion.
I move.
Second that.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.